The first thing that jolted this entire controversy back into public view wasn't a new allegation, a new witness, or even a formal legal action. It was a single line spoken during Josh Brown's police interview, a sentence so small that most people might have missed it if they weren't listening closely. But once it resurfaced, once people heard it in full context, it lit up the conversation around the Daystar controversy all over again and pushed both supporters and critics to demand clarity. Before we go any deeper, make sure you hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss major updates on this unfolding story, because every week, new pieces are surfacing that change the shape of the narrative completely. This renewed scrutiny centers around contradictions in Brown's statements about his interactions with the Lamb family and, most importantly, their young daughter. Brown told investigators he had only been inside the family home one time and that any contact he had with the child was always supervised. His version of events was simple, short, and direct. But the moment his claim was compared to the consistent accounts of multiple family members, gaps began to widen into full contradictions. Several members of the Lamb family described repeated visits, not just one, and said those interactions did not always have another adult present. In fact, witnesses say there were moments when the child and Brown were left alone, moments described as brief, but significant enough to make family members uncomfortable. That difference, one visit versus multiple, supervised interactions versus unsupervised ones, is what sparked this latest wave of questions about accuracy, credibility, and whether the original investigation ever had all the necessary pieces. The story becomes even more complex when you consider the child's reaction during one of those visits. According to the family, this wasn't a minor behavioral shift or a moment of random shyness. They described the girl suddenly ducking under the kitchen counter and hiding, an instinctive and protective reflex that signaled distress. Anyone familiar with child behavior, especially in situations where something feels off, understands that a child hiding is not something to dismiss. Their bodies often respond long before they can articulate words, and their reactions tell stories adults sometimes struggle to interpret. For the family, this moment wasn't just emotional, it was alarming. That instinctive act became one of the earliest red flags pushing parents to question what was happening when they weren't looking. From there, the narrative broadens into what witnesses have referred to as a repeating pattern, often described as the unicorn pattern. According to multiple family members, Brown allegedly used a recurring pretext involving a toy or activity to enter the child's room or gain private access. Whether the toy was literally a unicorn or simply a symbol of the repeated behavior, the core point remains: family members believed there was a pattern, not a single moment. In child safety contexts, patterns are everything. One unusual moment raises an eyebrow, repeated actions establish intent. If family members witnessed the same behavior more than once, and if it involved private access to a child's space, the concern becomes not theoretical but urgent. What makes these concerns even more troubling is the revelation that the nanny, reportedly the person most often with the child, and the one who would have had the clearest view of who entered the home and when, was never interviewed by investigators. That missing interview is one of the biggest gaps in the case. In any situation involving a child, the caregiver closest to daily activity is a crucial witness. Without their perspective, the investigation loses a vital piece of context. This absence has caused many to question the thoroughness of the process and whether investigators were given a complete picture of the household dynamics and the interactions taking place. Then there is the language Brown used during his police interview, which has become the center of online debate. His statements shifted as the interview went on, moving from strong denial to more uncertain phrasing. It wasn't just what he said but how he said it, moments where he paused, moments where he reframed, moments where a simple denial became surrounded by explanations that appeared to evolve as the questions became more pointed. The line that captured the most attention was his statement, "I knew she was going up there." For many listeners, that sentence conflicted sharply with the claim of always being supervised. If he didn't follow the child intentionally, if he truly had no desire or attempt to be alone with her, then why emphasize knowing where she was going? Why did this statement sound less like an accident and more like awareness? Critics seized on this line as an example of shifting narrative rather than a consistent account told confidently from the start. At the same time, several family members, including Jonathan, Suzy, Israel, and Sylvia, have shared their perspectives, each describing events that contradict Brown's version. Their stories align with each other far more closely than with Brown's statements, and that consistency has strengthened public skepticism toward his account. The alignment of multiple testimonies raises questions about whether the truth is closer to what the family describes rather than what Brown claims. Supporters argue that multiple people recalling the same troubling behavior is not something to overlook. Opponents argue that families can influence each other's perceptions. But on both sides, one fact remains undisputed: these testimonies do not match. Beyond the behaviors themselves, many witnesses have described a deeper systemic issue within Daystar, an institutional pressure that allegedly discouraged employees and close associates from speaking openly. Several individuals connected to the ministry say financial dependence played a significant role in keeping people quiet. If a person relied on the ministry for income, housing, or stability, voicing a concern could feel like risking their livelihood. That dynamic can create a culture where silence feels safer than honesty, where concerns are hidden rather than addressed, and where institutional loyalty outweighs the protection of the vulnerable. Whether or not that culture existed exactly as described, the perception alone has been enough to amplify public demands for transparency. What pushed this renewed controversy into full force was not just the contradictions, or the missing testimony, or the shifting language, but the way all of these elements combine to form a story that feels deeply incomplete. The public wants answers, and many believe those answers can only come through an independent reassessment of the case. People are asking hard questions. Why were certain witnesses never interviewed? Why do testimonies differ so dramatically? Why did a child react with instinctive fear? And why are there still so many unresolved gaps? The deeper takeaway is that contradicting testimonies cannot be brushed aside simply because a formal investigation once took place. When accounts deviate on fundamental details, how many visits occurred, whether supervision was present, and why a child behaved as she did, there is a responsibility to pursue the truth more thoroughly. Missing interviews represent investigative failures that demand correction. Behavioral red flags from a child are not minor oddities, they are critical cues that must lead to action. Shifting language in a key interview suggests the need for corroboration rather than blind acceptance. And alleged institutional pressure raises the question of whether employees and family members ever felt free to tell investigators everything they knew. In the end, this story is not just about one man's statements or one family's suspicions. It's about whether truth can emerge inside a system where fear, loyalty, and power are all intertwined. It's about whether a ministry rooted in spiritual authority is capable of investigating itself without bias. And most importantly, it's about ensuring that a child's well-being is not overshadowed by an organization's desire to protect its image. As scrutiny intensifies, public voices will continue to demand accountability, transparency, and fairness, not for the sake of controversy, but for the sake of clarity and protection. The unresolved gaps in testimony must be addressed if trust is ever going to be rebuilt. And while the story is far from over, one thing is clear: the public will not be satisfied until every missing piece is placed on the table. If you want continued coverage of each development in this case as it unfolds, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. This story is changing quickly, and the truth, wherever it leads, deserves to be brought to light.